Hey everyone, welcome back, and let's write some more neat code today. So today let's solve the problem event emitter. This might be my favorite JavaScript challenge yet, and I believe it's day 28. So we want to design an event emitter class. If you're familiar with like the way callbacks work in JavaScript, this is pretty similar, and we're trying to like implement that. It's also pretty similar to like the pub sub pattern, which is a coding design pattern that's actually pretty useful. I know a lot of design patterns aren't very useful, but this is one that you probably don't want to forget about, and it will definitely come up a lot, including in like system design as well. So this is a really good problem. And thankfully today's implementation is actually going to be pretty simple. So you can go ahead and read the description if you want. It's quite long and it might be worthwhile reading if you're a beginner, but I'm just going to skip straight to the example code so we can see exactly what we're trying to implement here. So first things first, we create an instance of our event emitter class, and thank God they let us use class syntax this time, so we won't have to struggle with the other stuff. And in this case, we have a function, a callback. Basically, what we're trying to do is return 99 anytime some event happens. In this case, it's on click, and we know it's on click because in our emitter class, our emitter instance that we just created, we call subscribe to this event. The event is defined by a unique string. In this case, it's on click, but I mean, arbitrarily, we could pass in anything we wanted, but I won't. What we're saying is whenever this event occurs, we then want to execute this function, which doesn't really do anything. It just returns 99, but maybe it was going to console log something, or maybe it's going to do something dynamic, like open up a dropdown or some kind of other thing, right? Like maybe when you click this, you want to open this dropdown up. So that's kind of the power behind this and the power behind like asynchronous programming. So how do we do that? Well, how does that event even fire? Like in real life, usually the framework or the browser is handling that. It tells us when like the click fires or not. But in our case, we're being a bit more explicit and a bit more simple. But you can imagine something like this is what's being implemented under the hood of like that functionality in your browser. But in this case, we have the emitter and we explicitly call emit. This is basically like saying fire this event, fire the on click event. And we know when that event is fired, 99 is going to be returned. But it's possible that we have multiple callbacks on the click event. You know, you can imagine I'd redefine this function a few more times, and in one of those functions, I end up returning 100 rather than 99, and I have that same callback. Now, this wouldn't work because we're using the same name here, but I'm just trying to get the point across. And in that case, this emit event wouldn't just emit 99, it would emit two values. That's the reason why this is wrapped in an array, because we could have multiple callbacks for a single event. That does make sense. Maybe when you click something, you want multiple things to happen. So that's the idea behind this. Another thing is we should also be able to unsubscribe events as well. But how it's happening here is a bit subtle. When we called subscribe on the emitter, it returns something to us. And on that object that we returned, we are calling the unsubscribe method. And once we have unsubscribed this callback from this event, then when we call emit one more time, the event should no longer fire. So that does make sense, but maybe the implementation is kind of confusing for you. Don't worry, it's actually more simple than you might expect. So I think that's enough for us to know what we're trying to implement. So now let's go ahead and get started on the implementation. You can see we're given two functions, two methods that we want to implement. But obviously we're going to need some member variables if we want to actually like keep track of all those callbacks. So what you could do is in the constructor, you could define something, but I think that's unnecessary because in our case, what I'm going to be using is just an event map, which in our case is just going to be an object. And the reason we're doing this is because we want to be able to take an event, which is a string. Remember, it could be a string like on click, and we then want to map that to probably a list of callbacks that we want to execute every time that event is emitted. In my case though, I'm going to actually use a set because I think it's a little bit easier to handle the removing, like handle the unsubscribing, but we'll get to that. You could also do it with an array. I'm pretty sure that would work as well. So this is our data model. It's not super complicated, but the JavaScript might be a little bit confusing. So let's start with the subscribe. The first thing we want to do, given an event, we want to probably add the callback. This is a function. I wish they had just called it fn, but CB stands for callback. And we want to add that callback to the set corresponding to this event. So sounds easy enough. We can just say this dot event map for this particular event. We want to add to that this callback. Now, the edge case is, what if this event doesn't exist? Then this whole thing is going to return undefined, and we can't call a method on undefined. So the way to handle that might be this event map. Just check if it has that property. I call hasOwnProperty, but I am pretty sure we could also use the in operator, but let's just do this for now. So does this already have the property? Well, we're checking if it doesn't already have the property. So then if it doesn't, we probably want to set the event map for this event to an empty hash set like this. So that's simple enough, nothing crazy so far. And now for the unsubscribe. What's going on here might be kind of confusing, but remember, this is returning an object, and on that object, we have one method called unsubscribe, which we want to call without any parameters like down here. And what that should do is probably remove this callback from the event map. So just like how we added it here, we can do the exact opposite over here. And I believe the method is delete, and that'll also be a constant time operation because we're using a hash set here. Now we're almost done, but what exactly do we want to do when an event is actually emitted? Well, that's also not super hard, because remember here, we're always going to be returning an array of values. It's possible it might be empty, but we're always going to be taking that array of values and returning it. Now, the way we populate it is going to be by taking all the events in the event map for this particular event. So all the callbacks for this event. So we could iterate through it with a for loop. Might as well do a little bit of functional programming. You can also use the for each operator, which will basically just execute some callback for this event. So that's what I'm going to be sticking with, but it's up to you how you exactly want to implement it. And remember, when we're iterating through this, what we're iterating through is all the functions. So for every function, or I guess let's call it a callback, because just to be consistent up here, for every callback, we want to actually execute that callback. Now, you might see the second parameter here, which is args. It's optional in this case. It could be an empty array, or it could actually be some arguments. And these are probably the arguments that we want to pass into the callback. For each callback, we're going to pass in these arguments, but we're going to use the spread operator. So far, all we've done is actually executed the callback, but we want to return the result of every callback. So here, instead of just calling it, I'm going to say result.push this callback. And you might be thinking, are we allowed to do that if the array is constant? Well, this just means that this variable can't be reassigned. It doesn't mean the contents of the array have to be constant. But there is one bug, just like how up here, we had to check that the event had already not been inserted. Here, I guess it's possible for them to call emit on some event that doesn't even exist in our event map. You could have like an if statement over here to handle that, but I'll show you, I guess, the slightly more clever way, which uses the nullish coalescing operator, or you could also use this operator, I think, like the double or the logic or. Basically here, we're only allowed to call for each on an array, but it's possible that this will evaluate to undefined if the event doesn't exist in the event map. If that's the case, then the easiest thing to do would just be add the nullish coalescing operator and have an empty array. So what this will now do is, if the left side evaluates to undefined or null, in this case it's going to be undefined, then it's going to evaluate to an empty array, which we can call for each on. It won't do anything, but that's pretty much what we would want to do anyway. So this is just a slightly more clever way of writing it. I thought it was worth showing you how to do that. And I believe that is the entire code. I think each of these operations is a constant time operation. So now let's run it to make sure that it works. And as you can see, yes, it does. And it's pretty efficient, at least on this run. I think last time I ran it, it wasn't quite as efficient. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe. If you're preparing for coding interviews, check out Leetcode.io. It has a ton of free resources to help you prepare. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.